A huge piece of what companies hire for is a culture fit. We call it culture fit, but really it's, can I see myself and envision myself working with you? Like, are you a human being versus like an AI bot? And AI bots can be perfect, right? Not perfect, but they produce really great work, but they're a robot. People want to see people. They don't want to see, here's your perfect resume, here's your perfect portfolio, here's everything. It's like, I want to see the real human. I want to see eyes. I want to see somebody who I'm going to be working with.
Before we start the show, I have a quick question for you. Is your resume stuck in the rejection pile? At Resume Assassin, I create powerful resumes that showcase your skills, experience, and achievements, getting you noticed by recruiters. I'll also optimize your LinkedIn profile, transforming it into a magnet for opportunity. Visit resumeassassin.com today and take charge of your job search. Visit resumeassassin.com. Welcome to Resume Assassin Presents Recruiting Insider, where I create a safe space to have candid conversations with recruiters and LinkedIn thought leaders. This podcast promises to inform, entertain, and inspire. You know the feeling, right? You spend hours sifting through resumes and everyone seems, well, average. But then there's that one amazing person, the candidate who literally leaps off the page. That's the A player, the person who consistently crushes it. On this episode, I'm chatting with Michelle Kuo, who's going to share some recruiting secrets for finding those rock stars. We'll uncover the hidden signals that tell you someone's got the right stuff. But it's not a one-way street. We'll also explore what A players themselves do to stand out. I literally can't wait for this conversation today. Michelle Kuo, welcome to Recruiting Insider.
Hi, well, thanks for having me on here. It's exciting.
Yes,
and
it's
I
a
love
pleasure.
This topic.
Michelle helps CEOs, business owners, and companies hire fast and hire right. She has led recruiting for multiple startups and IPO companies such as Qualtrics, Chatbooks, Lucid, Health Catalyst, Disney, NFL.com, Stream Native, WB, and DirecTV. She's been featured in the Salt Lake City Tribune, Business Insider, Utah Business, and she's a highly sought-after speaker. And that's really just touching the surface of what this amazing human does. So Michelle, tell us a little bit more about your career journey.
Yeah, and I appreciate the intro. Whenever I hear it, it's always hard. And then I'm like, oh, yes, I did do a lot of those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I can start off so my career, I've always been kind of that straight A, 4.54. I had above 4.0.
Oh my goodness.
So I was one of those students that literally, one of my quarters, I got 5 because of straight A's, AP classes, honors. So I've been on that track and I know what that looks like. And so as soon as I graduated college, I fell into recruiting. Like a lot of people who get into recruiting, they don't know it's a profession, but I got into it and I loved it. One of the things that I really enjoyed was just getting to know people and making an impact on their lives. And you see when they land a job and they absolutely love it, they get a 20% increase on their salary. It's amazing. Like they're so excited. They're there for a couple of years. And then when they're ready to move on, they contact you and they remember you and they remember that experience. So I've been doing it for the last 15 years. And that's part of why you see kind of the long list of clients that I've worked with. I've been on agency side. I worked internally at Toyota as well. And then I started my own agency 11 years ago. And a lot of it has been Utah based, but we have worked a lot with companies that are looking for remote workers. So since COVID, everybody's gone remote. And so I'm used to working across the US with a ton of talent. So we can talk more about that, but that's kind of a little background on my career.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I've spoken with a lot of recruiters lately, and it does seem like that's kind of a trend where it's like you kind of just trip and fall into recruiting, and nobody ever really knows what exactly it is. And then they, kind of take it on and they fall in love with it because it's a very fulfilling career when you can help people.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, it's when I got into it, I mean, I was talking a lot and I loved talking to people, but I realized that, I'm solving like I'm making a difference on the candidates' lives, but I'm also solving a problem for our clients. So it was,
100%.
yeah, it's just the mental challenge of having to find people and finding the right people and finding those A players. Like that's what kind of fulfills me. And I love the challenge.
Yeah.
I've always enjoyed one key thing when you're looking at recruiters. I've always enjoyed looking, when you go into these highlight magazines as a kid and you're like searching, circling, like, where do you find the nail? Where do you find this? I love that. That's the only thing I did. I'd go through every magazine in the library and I'd just be circling it. And that's the reason why I realized this is why I enjoy finding people. I love it.
Yes,
It started as a
awesome.
child.
I love it. I love it. When that passion meets your profession, it's like that's where it's at. It's so satisfying.
Yeah.
So before we really dive deep into the topic today, I want to know from a high level perspective, what actually is an A player?
So you can kind of think of it as, when you're in grade school, 90% and above, right? Those are when you score 90% and above, that's what you look at as, oh, I got an A. So A players are the same way. And that's how I grade candidates. I grade them A minus, A. I don't rarely give a person an A plus because that's usually what you got to get 100%, and most people don't get 100%, right?
Yep.
So I do not grade people most of the time on A plus, but we call them A players. I do have B's, C's, and then below. Some people do fail. Okay.
Yeah, I would imagine.
The A players are really the top 10%. And they're people that go over and beyond what is asked of them. And they're putting in 110%. They're connecting the dots. They're anticipating needs, and they go beyond what the scope of their responsibilities are. So, for example, they're on a project, you tell them A, B, and C. Well, then they're thinking, okay, well, I did A, B, and C, and I did it really fast, and I did it really well. But let me see about D and E, and I'm thinking ahead, so I'm going to do F and G. So they're thinking way ahead, and they're thinking at a bigger, more strategic level. Like they're stepping back and trying to figure out where do they fit in this piece, but how do they make it easier for everybody else on the team as well as the company. So those are how the A players really stand out.
Yeah,
That's
I love
a little
that.
abstract. But
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, when I think of an A player, I think of someone, like you said, that's consistently exceeding those expectations. They're super creative. Like you said, they're thinking outside of the box. They're solving problems. They're coming up with ideas, and they just really have this exceptional ability to just like get shit done, right?
Yeah.
And they typically get promoted quickly too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They do.
So,
They get promoted. And they usually move into leadership roles eventually, or they go out on their own. So that's usually what you'll see with A players.
yeah. And I feel like they could easily get overlooked as well. So how could you actually recognize these people in the hiring process?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So A players are not necessarily the ones that interview the best. So I'll repeat that. They do not interview the best. And some of them are like, they're great because they have the presence, they have sales, personality, they can kind of tell you all the right answers. But there's a big portion of them that just don't know how to interview, and they haven't done it enough. They're not like the most articulate. For the most part, they are personable and they do have great communication skills, but some of the A players are just hidden gems. And so those are the ones I get really excited about. And so when you're asking this question, I'm like, yes, let's talk about this.
Yes, please. I wouldn't have guessed that they don't interview well. So this is
Oh, yeah.
great information.
I've done both. So I keep an open mind. I mean, generally speaking, I would say majority of A players do speak, like they have really great communication skills. You look at their resume, you can tell, but those are the obvious ones. The ones that you're looking for, and they always call them purple squirrels. Really, they're the ones that, they're quiet. They don't stand out, but they take on a lot. And when you're talking to them, I usually dig. So you have to ask second, third layer questions. And when I say second, third layer questions, I'm talking about if you say, okay, well, what did you do on this project? And they're like, oh, well, I did this, X. Then you have to think about the second layer questions. It's like, okay, well, you told me this. what was your contribution to this, and what did your team members do? And so then you can and then I would ask another question. That's the third layer question. You keep digging until you really get a good picture of the person and what their contribution to the team has been. So usually people who shy away from responsibilities, like let's say they only take on 10% of the project, those are usually the lower level people, or the people that are just the C players, the B players. But if you look at a project and they're like, oh yeah, I took on this, and this, and oh, I was taking on somebody else's responsibilities, but they don't say it in that way, and they led that whole project, almost 80-90% of it, on a team of 2 or 3, then you have an A player. And you have to, the key is asking those questions to get to the truth. And I think that's what a really awesome recruiter does. It's like asking those questions to really get to the details, to understand who truly was the person that led that project and owned it all.
Love that. So you have to keep digging and digging and digging until you really figure out who that person is. Yeah. Can you think of any specific examples of somebody that you interviewed that, maybe going into the interview, you didn't necessarily see them as an A player, but you kept digging and digging and asking questions, and you figured out, oh my gosh, this person is awesome, I have to hire them? Is there anybody that comes to mind?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. One of the examples, so a couple years ago, I had found a product marketing manager, and again, she was shy. So it's not like she was the best interviewer and she knew how to, answer questions and speak. She had good English and she was articulate. She was communicative. But as I dug further, I realized that she owned a huge aspect of email marketing, product marketing. Like, she got her hands into a lot of things. And as I kept asking her questions about, okay, well, what software? What are the pros and cons of this software? What have you done here? What do you think about, strategically, how would you assess this company? What would you do with it? So I was asking really detailed questions to get her thought process. And initially on paper, you're like, okay, she's 5 years or 7 years in her career. She looks mid-level. She's at some, you would call it no-name company. It's one of these just generic companies, just mid-level, mid-sized companies. So they're not a big brand. They're not, a Disney or Google or a Facebook. So a lot of these A players hide, or you can say they're hidden gems in these mid-sized, small companies, no-name brands. And that's what I love. I love finding them. And as I was talking to her about her experience throughout the interview process, she started just talking about what she did, what she shared. And I'm thinking, wow, you're actually a really high level, director strategic level, but your title only says manager, but she's doing these high level strategic thought leadership work. And so I started realizing how good of a person she was. And so I placed her at the company I was working with, and then she's gone on to move to a pretty large, well-known company. So wow. You'll see kind of that trajectory. Like, I take these candidates that are hidden, and then I start to place them, and then afterwards they start to move into really big brand companies because they start to get noticed. Yeah. And generally a lot of recruiters or hiring managers like to see, oh, this person's from Google or Microsoft or some big name, big name brand. But I love to find these little gems that are hiding and get them placed into other companies that are a little bit more higher brands, and then they start to get sought out after.
Wow. What qualities or personality traits make them stand apart?
So what personality and traits make them stand out from the general population? A players, I think they have grit. So that's one of the things that I've noticed is that they will figure it out. They don't give up, and they will figure out creative solutions to solve the issues. And sometimes they're thinking 1 or 2 steps ahead. So they're actually delivering on a golden platter. Here's what you asked for, but here's 1 or 2 steps ahead. And so they've done it all, and it's amazing to see that. And I have an A player on my team, so I know how that is when you have somebody that you've found that's just amazing A player. A little cheesy. So grit's one of them. I mean, they're definitely hardworking. So you'll see them. I mean, they're not working hard just to work for the sake of working hard. They're not putting in like 10-hour days, but they're working smart as well. They're trying to figure out, okay, how do I operationalize this process? How do I think smarter? How do I work smarter? How do we as a company work smarter? And so they're thinking not about themselves, well, not only about themselves, but they're also thinking about the company and the team. So they're thinking holistically of everybody who's involved and how is that affecting them. Yeah. And so I think A players know, how's their work going to drive revenue? How's it going to drive, top of the funnel marketing? How's it going to drive the code and having quality code so that the site doesn't crash? So they're thinking outside of themselves and on a bigger scale and a bigger picture.
Yeah, I love when there's that person on the team where it's like, you can go to them with any issue and they're going to figure out some way to solve it. That's always somebody that you want to have on your side.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. And you certainly want to have that on your team because they're like the jacks of all trades. Like they can figure it out, but they are specialized in one thing or two, but they are also just almost jacks of all trades. And you throw them an assignment and you know that it's going to get done and there's a fire, you put them on it and they increasingly get more and more responsibilities. So that's the other thing. When you look for A players, that maybe they were hired for a junior role, like let's say customer support. But over time, you start to see, they were thrown onto these other projects that were strategic. They were thrown onto these emergency projects. They were handling customers. They were doing more higher level work that was not part of their responsibilities. And that's when you know that you have an A player.
So what are a few interview questions that you use to get into their mind and figure out how they think?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, I have my go-to questions, so I'll start off with that. I do have my go-to interview questions, and I usually start off with that. So I'll contrast it. So the terrible candidates usually just answer the surface level question. So let's, I got to think on the fly here. So for example, I may say, okay, what are your numbers as a salesperson? What are your numbers? Or what percentage did you achieve? And let's say a B or C candidate will answer, I met my quota. And they keep it at that. Yeah. They're not detailed. It's short. It's not descriptive. It doesn't say anything about their work. An A player is going to say, well, over the last quarter and the last year, I've always been consistently 120% over my quota. I've been top 1% out of 34 sales reps. And so, my contribution to the company, I've been able to drive revenue X amount. And, I've been in the President's Club for the last 2-3 years. Yeah. So they're really descriptive. And so when I ask my go-to questions, it's really, I'm asking the second and third layer questions. Those are probably the key. And it's digging, because sometimes they won't give it to you. And then I'll have to ask, okay, well, did you make it to the President's Club? Oh yeah, I did. I did for the last 4 years. Okay, great. Okay, well, how are other people performing? On your team, how are other people performing? How do you compare to them? And so when I can get a compare and contrast, I get a baseline first of candidates, and then I understand what are A players doing that are different from the B's and the C's. That's when I start to see the difference. So I don't know if there's go-to questions, but it's the second and third layer questions that I'm asking to get to the truth.
Okay. So let's dig a little bit deeper then into the recruiting process. How do you set up specific recruiting strategies to attract these A players?
That's a good one. So A players, most of the time, they're happy and they're passive. So getting them on board is really tough. And I have joined a lot of startups that had an amazing culture. They just were not known. And so a lot of times I always start with employer branding. That's first and foremost. You got to start with employer branding. It's really having pictures, having a Glassdoor presence, being online, having a career page for the employer. So those are all the critical things that I like to set up when I work with startups. The next piece is you do work on the job description, but a lot of people don't read through the job description.
Yeah.
So even if you spend all that time, we laugh, but it's true.
It's so true. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can spend all day perfecting a job description. It's like perfecting your resume. You can spend all day perfecting it, but for the most part, people are not going to sit there and read word for word. And so what's going to really stand out is really the online, your employer brand. Mm-hmm. And so being able to link it. So you're like, hey, here's a video on our company. Here's our Glassdoor reviews. Here's our online presence. That's what's going to stand out for an A player more so. And even testimonial, like employee testimonials,
for sure.
Those are what's going to stand out more than a job description. So if I were to guess what percentage you want to spend on it as an employer, maybe 5% on your job description, 95% on all the employer branding stuff that we talked about.
Yeah, for sure.
And it goes with candidates. Same thing.
Oh,
resumes,
for sure.
5%, maybe, definitely make sure no typos. It reads well. But then I think just having an online presence, having a video of yourself, like that's where you get more traction than just a pure resume.
Yeah. Do you ever receive any resumes that stand out as an A player, or is it more, throughout the interview process where you can really determine whether they're that A player, B player, or C player?
With resumes, so it's really hard. I'll answer that. Resumes, it's really hard to detect whether or not they're A, B, and C. I can easily detect if they're B's and C's because they have typos and they don't write their resumes well, and maybe it's not formatted well. It just, but those are like the basics. You have to have those. It's like having a website, and as an employer, you have typos in your website. Like you have to minimally have it perfect. But A players, you won't know until you actually talk to them. That's why when having an online presence or having videos or whatnot, it's the same. It applies both to employers and it applies to job seekers and candidates.
Yeah. How would you attract an A player with a salary or even the company culture?
Yeah. A players are they're not driven by money at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So salary is always second or third on their list. It's not the first. And if it's the first, typically A players they're not A players unless they're salespeople. So salespeople, definitely. And they should be in sales. If they're driven by money and they do really amazing job, then they should be in sales. But if they're not in sales, then money is not their number one. And if they're driven by money, it's like, you're driven by the shiny car, but you're not really looking at the performance of it. You're looking at the outside. Yeah. And so when you're looking at salary, you want to pay them well. You definitely want to pay them above market, but that's not the leading factor. Yeah. The leading factor is really the impact that they have on the company. Like, what is their role going to be doing? And will they be able to have a huge scope in that role? Being able to move up is another thing. Career progression is huge for most A players. Actually, I would say almost all A players. And so they're asking about the future of the company. Where's the company going to be? What should, what is the role going to grow into? What are our opportunities look like? Yeah. So I would say that those are probably the two biggest things that they look for, more than the salary.
Yeah. I've worked with a lot of clients that I think I would consider A players, and many times these people seem to be passively searching all the time, or at least open to opportunities. And when you have a truly talented person on your team, to me, I think you want to make sure that you're recognizing them and rewarding them, right? Yeah. I spoke with a client a few weeks ago, and she's at the ultra, top performer at her company. She's an account executive in the tech space. I mean, her territory revenue literally makes up like 50% of the team's total revenue, which is insane. So, I mean, it would be easy for her to find another job, right? That potentially pays more, or even, a company that has more opportunity for growth. So how would you recommend that employers recognize and reward these people to make sure that they can retain them?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it. I mean, companies, companies will spend a lot of money on, just kind of I call them extra benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So they usually go, oh, well, we have, they tout the ping pong table or
Yeah.
the free snacks or, happy hours at this time. But ultimately, what's really important for A players, they're not driven by those extra, like the gym membership. And I mean, those are all nice to haves, but really what they're looking for are the career progressions. Like, how can they better learn skills and improve upon what they know today? Because they're driven by, they have fire under them. And when you have fire under their belly, they're always constantly learning. They're trying to figure things out. And so if you don't have the challenge there and you don't have opportunity for them to grow and move up, they're going to leave. And so the constant either mentorship or having an amazing manager that is working with them on their progress, that's probably the biggest key in making sure that you have a leadership team that cares about the A players that are constantly mentoring and managing them. Or more leading them, not managing them. It's more leading them.
Yep.
There's a difference.
Oh, for sure. Okay, so let's flip the script just a little bit. What are some ways that these A players can go beyond their resume to stand out?
Yeah. So I mean, so I know earlier I said, hey, don't spend as much time on your resume. You still have to have your resume perfect. Like, you don't want to be making any mistakes. You want to make sure it's easy, it's readable, it's clear and concise on what you've done. It's not convoluted. It's not a whole CV. So you definitely need to spend that time on your resume to get to a really good place. And sometimes A players don't have their resumes. That's what I've realized. Like, sometimes I'm getting passive candidates and they don't have resumes and they haven't touched a resume for 10 years. But I would say that in this market, you do need a resume because everybody's looking for a job.
For sure.
And they're on the market and you have to have a resume. So that is probably the number one key, is making sure your resume is in a very good, tight, as almost perfect as you can possibly get it, because it is very critical. The other piece is really getting their name out there. So whether it's promoting what they've done, case studies, projects, maybe sharing thought leadership, like posts on what they've learned, what they know, the more they can share their knowledge with the world, the more people can benefit, but also they remember that person. And so when the next opportunity comes up, they're able to refer them opportunities, because those A players they've kind of promoted themselves, not in a very hard salesy way, but in a way where it's like, hey, I know this is my marketing domain. Here's all the marketing articles I've read. This is what I know about this space. This is what I've done at the company. And then when the timing's right, I mean, the best opportunities are really ones that come when you're not looking.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some kind of creative ways that they could market and showcase some of their projects?
I've seen a mix. I've seen folks that, I mean, as long as it's not proprietary, right? And it's confidential,
sure.
Then you can't be posting it. But you can talk about it. I mean, you could talk about, hey, this is what I've done generally. This is what I've done.
Yeah.
We've increased, 136% of customer retention on this, or we've increased the top of the funnel. So you can actually talk about the numbers. You don't have to talk about the specific project, but video recording, you may be having a graphic on what you've done, and here are the numbers. Those always speak volume, and it's ways to promote outside of just, hey, here's my resume and here's what I've done. It's just another example, and I think it's a little bit easier. I mean, you got to look at your audience. Like, they don't have time in the day to go through your resume, so it's like, okay, what's a snapshot? It's an image, infographic, a quick video about what you've done. So I think the constant promotion is helpful for those that are looking to kind of get out there and showcase what they've done.
I love the idea of just a 2 or 3 minute video, and that's something that I've heard over and over again over the last couple of months. And I think that that's a way to really go above and beyond your resume and your LinkedIn profile to show the hiring manager or the recruiter who you are, but then it also personalizes it too. So you can show your hard skills, but it also allows you to show some of those soft skills.
Oh yeah. And a huge piece of what companies hire for is a culture fit. We call it culture fit, but really it's, can I see myself and envision myself working with you? Like, are you a human being versus like an AI bot? And
exactly,
AI bots can be perfect, right? Not perfect, but they produce really
pretty
great
darn
work. Yeah, but they're a robot. And so it's, people want to see people. They don't want to see, hey, you're just a perfect, here's your perfect resume. Here's your perfect portfolio. Here's everything. It's like, I want to see the real human. I want to see eyes. I want to see, somebody who I'm going to be working with.
Yeah. Yeah. So for any of our listeners who are out there that either want to be an A player or they are an A player and they want to position themselves as such, and they've already kind of nailed their resume, what are some other ways that they could really create a strong online presence and personal brand to get noticed?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the first one that comes to mind is LinkedIn, because almost all professionals are on LinkedIn. So build out your LinkedIn, make sure it is clear and concise on what you do and what you do for who. That's a big key. So if you have that, that's very obvious. I think having images on maybe the clients you've worked with or the companies you've worked with, those are always really, really important. So there's a credibility factor to it. The other key is, if you have time as an A player to write articles, those are always really great. So posts, articles, things that have your name attached to it is always a really excellent way to kind of promote yourself and share. I mean, at the end of the day, you're sharing your knowledge and showing the world that, hey, I know this stuff. This is what I know. And you're sharing it, to kind of provide some impact out there. So I would say those are probably the three things that I would really focus on.
Okay. And what are some questions that an A player could ask during the interview itself?
Yeah, there's, usually A players know what to ask, but if they don't, usually they're asking, like it's funny because when I interview, I start, sometimes it's not obvious that they're A players, but as I start to talk to them about their background, the other piece that I look for is just what kind of questions are they asking? Are they curious? Are they asking about the company, the hiring manager, the colleagues? So they're asking much more than just a job description that they see on paper. They're really asking questions about, just who's the hiring manager? What are their beliefs? Why did they join the company? Who are their colleagues? Why did they join the company? What's the company culture? What's the opportunity for growth? Where do you see yourself in, where is the company going to be in the next 3 to 5 years? And where is this role going to be? So they're really thinking ahead, and they're thinking bigger picture. They're not just thinking, what's day one salary? What's my benefits? They're less about day one and, the ping pong table, is it there? Is the pizza there? Is the happy hour there? Like, they're not thinking about day one. They're actually thinking about day 90, a year from now, day 5 years from now, and where they're going to be. So they're planning ahead of time. And those are some of the questions that they ask.
Yeah, I mean, they really want to know how they can step in and make that immediate impact. And then how can I actually grow with the company? How can I make an impact on this position? How can I impact the team and make them better? And how can I really grow with the organization? I think those are some great insights. So what are the top 3 takeaways from our conversation today?
I know we shared a lot, so I have to think about this. Who would be the target, as you'd say? Top 3 takeaways for A players? Ooh, that's a tough one. I know we talked about a lot, so I'm just trying to figure out how to summarize what I've talked about and what are the top 3 takeaways. So I would say the top 3 takeaways from today is A players are the top 10%. And the only reason why they are the top 10% is because they're thinking ahead. They've got the hunger. They got the drive. They're thinking not just day one, but they're thinking a year, 3 years, 5 years out. And they're planning ahead. 2, A players are not always those that are online touting what they've done. Sometimes you find a lot of hidden gems, and I find a ton of the hidden gems that are in companies. They're quiet, they're the introverts, They don't tout their skills, and they're not even getting paid what they're supposed to be. And so I think the third point is for those who are quiet and introverted, but they are A players, it's really how do you build your personal brand so that it is out there? And those are through posts, getting your LinkedIn in a good place, writing articles, getting featured in places. Because the more that you are out there, the more you don't have to brag, but somebody else is helping you promote. And that's going to be really important. So those are 3 points I would say that would summarize our conversation.
I love it. So what are you up to now, and where can we find you on social media?
Yeah. I've been doing recruiting for 15 years. I've been running my own firm called Jump Search Recruiting for the last 11 years. Most of my clients have been in tech, but I've also done B2C, not hardware. We've done other industries, and a lot of what we focus on have been startups to smaller companies, but they've also been hyper growth companies like Qualtrics and Lucid. So that's where my bread and butter is on the recruiting side. You can find us on jumpsearchrecruiting.com. And then the other piece that I'm also building out is a virtual assistant company. And then it's all in recruiting. So it's either recruiting for companies or it's recruiting for solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, people who want to lift in what they do day to day, and they just don't have enough time in the day to do all the mundane tasks. So having an amazing virtual, I would say, executive assistant is key. And that's the key to growing a business. So those are the 2 businesses. It's called Jump Search VA, and I can also send you a link to the website, so that way you have those links.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Michelle. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate all these questions. It's been amazing.
Thanks for listening. I will be releasing episodes every Monday, so be sure to subscribe on the platform that you are watching this, give it a 5-star review, and we'll see you next time.